Hello, everyone. Just a couple more minutes until we get started, so I'm just going to wait for some more people to jump on. Okay, well, it is starting time, so I'm going to go ahead and get going. Thank you all for joining me today. My name is Rachel Smith, and I'm going to be your host today. I am super excited to share all of this information with you all, as what I'm about to share played a huge role in the success of me reversing my autoimmune symptoms naturally. So I am going to get started right away, and at the end, you guys will have time to ask any questions that you might have. All right, so can you guys relate to any of the following symptoms? Fatigue, so maybe you have a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, or just even making it through the day. A lot of skin issues, so acne, rashes, little red bumps, dry skin, maybe some heart irregularity like a slow heart rate, heart palpitations, painful joints, swollen joints, possibly even some muscle issues going on that are similar, mood issues like irritability, depression, anxiety, digestive distress like diarrhea, constipation, acid reflux, insomnia, having difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, or both. And if you're here, maybe you have an autoimmune disease already that's diagnosed. But if you do have one, I'm sure that you can still relate to a lot of these symptoms. And then you've probably gone to the doctors before and heard things like a doctor telling you, oh, you're just stressed, you're just anxious, you're just depressed, your blood work looks normal, all of this is in your head. And a lot of times these doctors are just willing to give you a prescription in order to cover up your symptoms, or they just tell you these things and kind of send you on your way. So if you've been nodding your head saying yes to all of this so far, I really encourage you to hang tight and watch the entire webinar. The information that I'm about to give you will definitely help you to reverse your symptoms naturally. And if you're here today, I bet you already know that there must be a better way than just suffering or just taking prescriptions for the rest of your life. And so today in this webinar, I'm first going to just tell you a little bit about myself, and then I will share with you the truth about autoimmune diseases that doctors don't tell you. We'll talk a little bit about some of my previous clients and how this information has helped them and many others. And we'll go into how you have the ability to actually reverse your symptoms in a more natural and holistic way. I'm going to explain a few different nutritional options that best serve autoimmune populations, and then also share the way that I approach these same issues with my clients. And then finally, we're going to touch on what you can implement immediately in your life to actually become healthier, and some additional ways that you can start to investigate the root causes of your autoimmune disease or whatever symptoms you may have that your doctor is most likely not checking. So a little bit about me. I am an FDNP, which stands for a Functional Diagnostic Nutrition Practitioner. But before I achieved this, I did a lot of other schooling. I have a bachelor's degree in healthcare administration, but when I started working in the field, I noticed how broken our medical system was. And actually at the same time, I wound up getting very sick with an autoimmune disease. So I wound up going back to school to study the sciences. I wanted to just help others from the provider side. So I wound up taking biochemistry, anatomy, physiology, many other courses. I did scientific research for a few years. I worked with 3 different institutions doing scientific research, and that's where I really developed a love for research. I was just trying to find the right direction to go. And so I even went to medical school for about 7 months before finding the FDN program, which is what really resonated with me the most. So now I absolutely love what I do, which is mostly one-on-one coaching. And I get to help people who have autoimmune diseases and all of these chronic illness symptoms and help them reverse them naturally. So I run functional labs with clients to actually get to the root cause of the issues that are going on. And these labs allow me to look into the function of hormones, immune system, digestion, detoxification function, and many other systems as well. And then from there, we take that information and I work with my clients on nutrition, movement, sleep, stress management, toxin elimination, targeted supplementation, and anything else that is necessary to help them heal. So I have or had an autoimmune disease that I silently suffered with for many years. I went from one conventional doctor to the next, and my hair was falling out. I had zero energy, brain fog, joint pain, heart palpitations, insomnia. I had no menstrual cycle for a few years. I mean, you name it. And so basically, I was a complete wreck by the age of 22. And at one point, doctors actually performed an exploratory heart surgery on me because my heart palpitations were so bad. And during the surgery, they found absolutely nothing. And I wound up with just another medical bill. This time it was a $100,000 medical bill. And I was just so sick and tired of feeling the way that I did, not getting any answers, and just having debt pile up in front of me. So that was kind of the tipping point for me where I finally turned to holistic and alternative care. So a holistic functional practitioner was finally able to diagnose me with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune disease where your body attacks the thyroid. So this was the very first time I experienced functional lab testing, and I had a food sensitivity test done. Now it turns out that what I was having an immune reaction to was hundreds of foods. So the doctor was actually shocked at my results and said it was some of the worst test results that he had ever seen. And basically, I had been eating all wrong for my body and for my disease, even though I thought I was eating healthy. Now, I have a background in competitive weightlifting and martial arts, so I had been consuming lots of rice and oatmeal and veggies and whey protein powder shakes. Again, all things that I thought were good for me. Now, most of these things actually wound up to be on the do not eat list or the elimination list. And so my diet completely changed, and so did the entire way that I thought about food. And once I adapted this new nutrition plan, the symptoms of my autoimmune disease actually started disappearing one by one. And nutrition isn't the end all be all. I just want to make that clear. It is super important though. And so I worked very hard for years after this with an acupuncturist, naturopathic doctors, functional medicine doctors. I read many medical books, scientific journals. I listened to hundreds of podcasts. And then I eventually went back to school to learn more about holistic health and functional medicine to become the practitioner that I am today. And in addition to that, I eliminated toxins from my life and body, and I just changed my entire lifestyle. But currently, I feel great, and I don't experience any of the symptoms of Hashimoto's. So what is the truth that doctors don't tell you? Well, doctors will tell you that your autoimmune disease is not curable. But what they don't tell you is that there are ways to put it into remission naturally. This isn't something that they're taught about in medical school. Their education is made up of diagnosing diseases, using surgery to cut things out of the body and repair them, managing or suppressing disease symptoms with pharmaceuticals. And on average, medical doctors or MDs actually only get about 20 hours or less of nutrition education. So it's not necessarily their fault that all they know how to do is diagnose and prescribe. Doctors are very heroic when it comes to emergency medicine and some other cases. But I'm here to tell you that there is good news, and it actually is possible to use nutrition and lifestyle modifications to reduce the symptoms of your autoimmune disease and possibly even put it into remission. So I'm living proof of this, and there are many other stories like my own. All right, so I want you to meet Allie. This was one of my clients. She is in her early 30s. She developed rheumatoid arthritis in her mid-20s. And before working with me, she had constant inflammation and pain in her feet for over 5 years. And the pain and inflammation in her hands and her wrists would be present for many, many months at a time. Sometimes would go away for a little bit, but not for long before flaring back up. And so she didn't even have any kind of control of these flare-ups, didn't know what was causing them and what was making those go away, but she still had that constant pain and inflammation in her feet. And then she also complained of fatigue, PMS, anxiety, and lots of other symptoms. So this is Allie now. After working with me one-on-one, within just a few weeks, the pain and inflammation in her feet was actually completely gone. So the only thing that we changed at this point was her diet. And what we did was we used a combination of an autoimmune protocol style diet, and we ran some food sensitivity testing. So she healed something in just a few weeks that she had suffered with for over 5 years. We also tested her hormones and noticed that some things were off there, such as her cortisol and estrogen levels. And a couple months into adjusting her lifestyle, based upon what we saw on the hormone results, her PMS symptoms completely disappeared. And I'm talking about things like breast tenderness, cramping, bleeding in between cycles. Her anxiety decreased, her energy increased, and her rheumatoid arthritis pain and inflammation was almost non-existent. So I'm sure that you all are ready to get your old lives back and actually experience what myself and my clients have. So let's get into how we can actually make this happen for you. So what are the first steps to reversing your symptoms? Well, like I said, one of the most powerful things you can do to start healing is change what foods you're putting into your body. First, you need to eliminate foods that could be causing an immune response in your body for about 3 to 6 months. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're adding in healing, nutrient-dense foods into your diet. And then during this time, you will also want to work on repairing any damage done to your gut lining. And so I'm going to explain this a little bit for the next couple slides. How a healthy immune system works is that it will produce antibodies, which are basically like your defense system. And these antibodies will attack foreign invaders or harmful cells. However, your immune system, if you have an autoimmune disease, will produce antibodies that will also attack healthy tissues and cells. So this is the basis of an autoimmune disease. Now, there is a major correlation between what is called intestinal permeability and autoimmune diseases. So the lining of the gastrointestinal tract is supposed to stay tightly closed in order to prevent food particles and toxins from getting out of your gut and into your bloodstream. Unfortunately, intestinal permeability can occur when this gut lining starts to break down and separate, which is also known as leaky gut. Now, this can happen from many different things. This damage can occur from a poor diet, So that could be a consumption of too much sugar, alcohol, gluten, processed foods. This can occur from not managing stress, being exposed to environmental toxins, and even having pathogens present in the gut. So when a leaky gut is present, food particles will enter in through the gut and into the bloodstream. And so antibodies will then be created towards those foods because your immune system is actually seeing them as an invader to your system. Now, what's important here is that leaky gut goes hand in hand with food sensitivities as well as autoimmune disease. So those antibodies created against foods you're eating create this inflammatory immune response. And the symptoms that can occur would be headaches, joint pain and inflammation, rashes, acne, bloating, constipation, depression, anxiety, all the symptoms we kind of already went over, and symptoms that you're probably familiar with. So this is a picture of what your intestinal lining or your gut barrier is supposed to look like. On the left-hand side, we see that there are cells, which are called enterocytes, and they're very close together. They're nice and together. They're held together by something called tight junctions, which you can see on the picture. And basically, those tight junctions together prevent those food particles and other particles that are above in the gut from getting into the bloodstream. Now, this slide represents leaky gut or intestinal permeability. So the tight junctions are separated here. And again, this is due to things we previously discussed, like bad foods, stress, pathogens, all of that. Now you can see the bad bacteria, the toxins, the undigested food particles, they're slipping right through those cells, those enterocytes, and getting straight into the bloodstream. Now, this is actually how you can develop food sensitivities and systemic inflammation, which turns into all of those terrible autoimmune and mysterious illness symptoms. So this is why you want to repair the mucosal barrier as you're healing. And I mean, we definitely don't want the intestinal lining to stay like this. And just one more clarification on what is the difference between a food sensitivity and a food allergy. So food sensitivities are not deadly. In fact, they can occur up to 72 hours after consuming the offending food. So almost half of the population suffers from food sensitivities, and the most common ones are wheat or gluten, dairy, corn, soy, and eggs. And again, you can see all of the symptoms associated, like eczema, fatigue, IBS, joint pain. I think you guys get the point with all the symptoms here. And a food allergy is less common and has a more immediate reaction within a couple hours, and it's definitely can be life-threatening. So people typically know that they have a food allergy since the reaction is so quick and intense, and it's often discovered at infancy, whereas food sensitivities can go unnoticed for sometimes someone's entire life. So what is the actual approach to figuring out nutrition and figuring out what you're supposed to eat? Well, there's two main approaches to finding the foods that are right for you to consume and to avoid that are going to help you heal. There is the AIP diet, and then there's also food sensitivity testing. But when I work with my clients, I actually use a combination of the two. And so foods that need to be removed should be done so for about 3 to 6 months. And this might sound shocking to you if you've ever heard anything about food sensitivities before, and it probably sounds shocking because there are so many people out there, I've seen it online, guides and coaches and things like that, saying you just need to do this kind of diet for a month. However, that's absolutely not true. It can take up to 3 months for the antibodies against those foods to actually disappear and stop causing that immune response when you eat the food. And it also takes that long, or maybe even longer for some people, to heal the gut lining. So this is why it's very important to do all of this during this elimination phase and make sure that you're doing it for a long enough period of time. Okay, so the first approach, the AIP diet. AIP actually stands for the Autoimmune Protocol. Now, the purpose, again, is to find out what foods are triggering an immune response, and these are the most common foods that do so, and therefore they should be removed for a period of time. So let's just go over these. We've got alcohol, grains, which would include things like wheat, barley, rye, corn, rice, coffee, legumes. Legumes are things like black beans, chickpeas, kidney beans, also cocoa or chocolate. Nightshades. Nightshades are things like peppers, eggplant, white potatoes, paprika, soy, nuts and seeds. And also for seasonings, it would also include any seasonings that are based on nuts, seeds, nightshades. And then we've got dairy. Dairy would be things like butter, cheese, yogurt, eggs, food additives, which would be things like colorings, preservatives, gums, industrial seed oils, which would be canola oil, sunflower oil, cottonseed oil, sugar, and most artificial sweeteners, sugar alcohols and artificial sweeteners. Okay, so what are you supposed to eat? Well, there's actually a ton of stuff you can consume on the AIP diet, and it is very important to make sure you're adding in nutrient-dense foods during this time. You definitely don't want to feel restricted. You definitely shouldn't feel hungry on the AIP diet, so you can fill up on all of the foods on this slide here. So you can have a wide variety of organic fruits and vegetables. Of course, we're excluding the nightshades here. Wild-caught seafood, so salmon, shrimp, anchovies, nose-to-tail, grass-fed meat and wild game. Wild game can be bison, elk, lamb, turkey. Nose-to-tail means consuming everything. So organ meats are very important for a lot of people in the healing phase, like liver. Liver is one of the most nutrient-dense things you can consume. It's packed with vitamins and minerals. Consuming healthy fats like avocado, coconut oil, extra virgin olive oil. Bone broth is very, very healing to the body. Herbs, fermented foods, non-iodized salt, so Himalayan salt, Celtic salt, things like that. And then you can use some sweeteners and healthy, more natural sugars. The sugars you would want to do in moderation, so the organic raw honey and like 100% maple syrup, since those would affect the blood sugar, whereas 100% monk fruit would be a great alternative that does not change blood sugar. And also, I encourage you all to reference the free autoimmune shopping guide that you received when you signed up for the webinar when you're making this transition, since there are some great recommendations on where to shop. Okay, another way that you can figure out food sensitivities is by doing a test. So there are many different tests, but the gold standards are either a IgG or an MRT-based blood test. And these tests normally check for hundreds of various foods and sometimes chemical sensitivities. So the IgG is a test. So IgG is an antibody that can form against foods you consume, therefore creating inflammation every time you consume it. And the response can be immediate or delayed, as we already talked about. And you might feel bloated immediately after consuming the food. You might get a headache 3 hours after consuming the food, or you might get acne or hives on your skin a day or two down the road. So this is where testing can come in handy, since it is so difficult to measure when you had a reaction and to what food the reaction was to. Now, IgG antibodies can be measured in blood in order to identify the specific antigen or food that's creating them. And reactive foods can then be removed from the diet. And these would again be removed for a few months before testing them out again and adding them back into the diet. There is a small downside to this kind of test. You must be consuming the food in your diet that's on the test in order to have a reaction. And this has to do with the lifespan of the IgG antibodies themselves. So typically you want to have consumed the food within the past 3 months for it to actually show up on the results accurately. Now, another type of test is called the mediator release test, or MRT for short. IgG, IgM, and IgA immune complexes trigger white blood cells to release these compounds that are called mediators of inflammation and pain. So this could be things like histamines, cytokines, prostaglandins, and the MRT measures the release of these mediators. And the MRT test checks for 170 different food and chemical sensitivities via blood. And this is the test that I typically use with my clients, and I actually prefer this test. And the nice part about the test is that you don't need to be consuming the food regularly in your diet in order to see an immune response. So this is unlike the IgG test. And another reason I love this test is that I can see a lot of chemical sensitivities in addition to the food on here. For those of you who do not want to move forward with testing, the AIP diet is one of the best starting places when trying to reverse your symptoms. It's absolutely free and you can start doing it today. If you are interested in doing testing and you want to work one-on-one with me, I'm just going to explain my approach a little bit. So I still recommend removing certain foods, even if they don't come up with a strong reaction on the test results. And one example to back up this reasoning is gluten. So gluten triggers the release of zonulin in most people. Zonulin is a protein that breaks open the gut barrier, leading to that leaky gut we talked about. Therefore, leaving gluten out of the diet while healing the gut is super important. So you must heal the intestinal permeability while you're dealing with the food sensitivities. So again, you want to avoid anything that could potentially hinder this healing process. So there's many other specific foods that I have my clients remove for that 3 to 6 month time period, or the unique period that works for them while we're working on healing. And then of course we add in tons of healing nutrient dense foods in place of what we removed. And these foods are all done on a case-by-case basis. There is not one single proper diet for everybody. Everybody's individual disease, biochemistry, symptoms, lifestyle factors, they're all unique and they should all be taken into account when approaching these issues. And then I actually provide my clients with a food planning software as well that takes into account all of these dietary changes while creating delicious recipes, meal plans, shopping lists, because I know how hard this transition period can be. So I want to make it as simple as possible for you. And I just want to remind you guys that these restrictions are not for forever. We do work to reintroduce many foods that were removed after your symptoms have been resolved. And I do want to make it clear that there are direct-to-consumer food sensitivity tests available, meaning that you can order tests on your own time online and do them at home. However, I can't promise that these tests are the best, the most accurate, or they cover all the foods and chemicals as other companies do. So you don't get the benefit of working with an expert guiding you through how to remove foods, how to add them back in, and things like that. So you just want to consider all those options. All right, so what's next? Well, you can start on an elimination diet today. And now that you know more about what you can and can't eat, you can just go ahead and start experimenting with it. You can also consider doing food sensitivity testing either on your own or with me. And I will work with you one-on-one to help you navigate the kind of confusing world of nutrition and disease. Now, during the elimination phase, it is very important to work on other pillars of health, such as sleep, hydration, movement, sunlight exposure, targeted supplementation, healthy relationships, addressing trauma, stress management, elimination of toxins from your body and from your environment, as well as healing the gut. And just a quick note on the reintroduction phase, it is a slow process and only one food can be reintroduced at a time. And you must wait a few days before trying another food, because symptoms, again, can take hours or days to appear. So the trick is to be hyper aware of your body, and keeping a symptom journal is super important. So if you've successfully made all of the dietary changes and all of the lifestyle changes I just talked about, but you don't see any improvements in your health, or you do see improvements, but eventually you hit a wall and you still have some lingering symptoms that aren't going away, then there are many other things that we could look at in your body to see what's holding you back. So as I mentioned in the beginning, healing my autoimmune disease was not only dependent on changing my diet. I also turned out to have high levels of mycotoxins in my body, which comes from mold exposure, high levels of heavy metals, yeast overgrowth, and other pathogens present, as well as hormonal imbalances. And this story, my own story, is so similar to many of my other clients, whether they have gut bugs, hormonal imbalances, or some sort of nutrient deficiencies. It is super important to dig even deeper to find out what's really causing the symptoms. So these are just some of my favorite tests that I run with my clients that give us valuable insight into what's actually going on and contributing to those symptoms. Gut testing, I use a GI map, which helps me determine if there's any pathogens hiding. This could be things like worms, yeast, viruses, bad bacteria, parasites, and symptoms associated with having bacteria out of balance or having a pathogen can include teeth grinding, bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, insomnia, nausea. And I can actually also see if leaky gut is present, how your pancreas is functioning, how your immune system is functioning, and many other things. The hair tissue mineral analysis test looks at 20 different minerals and toxic heavy metals. So if you have any fatigue, anxiety, brittle hair, cold hands and feet, numbness, tingling, weight gain, depression, this symptom could be very valuable to you. And then we've got an organic acids test. This is a nice one to evaluate nutritional deficiencies, neurotransmitter levels, so things like your serotonin and your dopamine, how those are functioning, fatty acid metabolism, and then a hormone test, which looks at cortisol, sex hormones, and some other markers, which can tell us about symptoms that you may be having in regards to anxiety, depression, irritability, low libido, muscle pain and weakness, maybe some menstrual cycle irregularities, PMS, all of those potential hormonal imbalances. So regardless of what's going on, there's always a way we can work together to dig deeper and then change nutrition, lifestyle, and potentially add in some healing herbs or supplements in order to heal. All right, so if you guys are ready to dive into healing and would like to talk further about working one-on-one with me, you can go to my website, naturalhealthrising.com, to book a free consultation. During this call, I just want to learn more about you, your health goals and concerns, and then see if I would be a good fit to work with you. And if not, I can always provide you with the next step you should take in your healing journey. And then also, if you mention that you attended this webinar, then you actually get special pricing just for attending. So I recommend going to my website as soon as you get out of this webinar so that you can secure a spot to chat with me. And I also recommend signing up for my email list so that you can stay up to date with all things that are health and wellness related in the holistic realm. Okay. So that is the end of the presentation. Thank you guys so much for taking the time and joining me and learning all about these more natural and holistic ways to approach these issues. So I am going to take some questions now. All right, lots of questions. So let's see. What is the difference between the labs that you run versus the labs that conventional doctors run? Okay, that's a great question. When it comes to, first of all, when it comes to ranges, what I use are called functional ranges. So what conventional doctors use are more of standard or normal lab ranges. Now, functional ranges are based upon ultimate health. We look at a closer range, and it's going to tell us, we want you in this range because we know that that's telling us that you're healthy, you're at an optimal level, whereas regular lab ranges at a doctor's office, they typically use the standard population in that area. They don't really base it upon being healthy or not. There may be a wide range of very healthy people versus very unhealthy people on there. So what happens is the range widens, and you might be at the very, very low end or very, very high end of a range, and a doctor tells you, well, it's normal because it's in range. Whereas when I'm looking at something, I'm looking at a much tighter range that is probably based upon scientific research showing me that people are healthiest there, or experience with other clients where we know that that is the best range. And also answering that question further, so food sensitivity testing, for example, not very common with conventional doctors. You might find some that do it, but typically they do allergy testing, which again is that more like anaphylactic shock reaction, whereas the food sensitivity testing is not as big in the conventional realm. Other things like the gut test that I run, for example, the GI map is the most accurate, technologically advanced type of stool test that there is available right now. And so it's just going to give me so much more information, and I might be able to find a detection of a bug or something on there that a conventional doctor can't, because of the PCR technology it uses and just because it is so cutting edge. Okay, another question. Let's see. What are the foods that we can reintroduce after the elimination phase? Okay, so after the elimination phase, you have your maintenance phase where you're eating this diet for a few months and you want your symptoms to start going away. So if they're not going away, there's something else going on. Maybe it's not food related, or maybe you haven't addressed the other issues in your life, such as sleep and hydration and movement and all that. But if you're feeling better and you're at the point where you want to reintroduce foods, then you can basically try them all out. You do it in kind of a stepwise process, and there is a whole formula in a sense as to which foods you should introduce and when. For example, you're supposed to start with a specific part of an egg, like an egg yolk or an egg white in the beginning. So ultimately you can try them all, but some foods that I really just never recommend adding back into the diet would be things like inflammatory seed oils. So canola oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, those oils don't do the body any good, period. They're very inflammatory, and that's one food group that should never be added back in, as well as some of the alternative sweeteners. For example, Sweet and Low and Splenda, they have really nasty cancer-causing chemicals and things like that in there. So that's another thing that you wouldn't want to add in. You can always just stick to the monk fruit and the honey and the healthier versions of sweeteners. And gluten is a big one that I don't recommend bringing back into the diet. So some people might do great adding grains back in, like rice and maybe even legumes like beans and things like that. But gluten typically doesn't sit well with most people. Again, it can do a lot of distress to the gut. So I would say everything besides maybe the gluten, the inflammatory oils, and some of the sugar and alternative sweeteners, you can add back in. Oh, and that was the second part to the question. I just answered it. What foods should we permanently avoid? Yes. And again, everybody is different. So you might do really well adding back in coffee and eggs and things like that and chocolate, but someone might not be able to add one of those back in. It just depends on your personal response. Okay, lots of other questions here. Let's see. I'm curious the costs of all of the tests and how you prioritize based on my symptoms. Great question. The costs of the tests vary. So, for example, the food sensitivity test can be somewhere around $300 to $400. The gut test is somewhere around a little over $400. Hair tissue mineral analysis test, almost $200. Hormone test, almost $200. They're not necessarily cheap tests, and unfortunately, insurance doesn't cover them usually. A great alternative is a health reimbursement account, an HRA or an HSA, a health savings account, and you can actually normally submit the receipts and get the testing and everything covered. I personally offer payment plans with my clients if somebody does need some assistance there. And how do you prioritize based on my symptoms? Yeah, so that's a really good question. It would be on a case-by-case basis. I take a lot of symptoms into account during the first call with someone. And if I'm seeing a ton of symptoms that seem to be GI related, I will definitely want to run the gut test. But in addition to that, I also will most likely want to run a food sensitivity test and a hormone test, since they can all be related. If someone's hormones are off, if they have a lot of cortisol or not enough cortisol, so they've been very stressed, that can be a factor in degrading the gut function. So I'd want to see both. And then if the gut function is messed up, then you might have, or most likely will have, food sensitivities. So those are my top three. And then I kind of just add them on from there based upon what else is going on. Okay. How do you... How do I know if your program is right for me? You can have a call with me. And that's where I decide and you decide if we are a good fit for each other. So typically I deal with people who either have an autoimmune disease or they have a lot of mysterious symptoms, just kind of like we spoke of in the beginning of the webinar, going to doctors, them turning you away, saying you have normal blood results, saying you're just depressed. There's always something further. Yeah, so just doing a free consult and we can chat and I can learn more about you, and then I can decide if I think that I would be a good fit and vice versa. And if not, then we can always talk about different options there. Ooh, this is a really good question. Are cruciferous vegetables bad for you? Thank you for asking that question, because that is such a big misconception. So cruciferous vegetables, for most people, are some of the most healing, nutrient-dense foods that you can consume. My recommendation is that you cook them a little bit. because you can destroy any of the potential goitrogenic compounds in them. A lot of people say don't eat them if you have thyroid issues, but really the goitrogenic compounds that could affect the thyroid are little to none. You would have to eat so many in order for them to really irritate the thyroid. But to be safe, what you would want to do is cook them a little bit. So baking them a little bit or sauteing them in a pan. Yeah, cruciferous vegetables, meaning broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, Brussels sprouts, and these are going to help detoxify the body, balance your hormones, and just so many other things. They're very supportive and healing, so definitely not bad for you most of the time. Again, all case-by-case basis, but generally. Is the AIP an all or none approach? Yes. So you can't do an AIP diet or an elimination diet and decide that you want to have a burger with a gluten bun once a week as a cheat meal or a piece of pizza every couple weeks. There is no cheat meal in doing this kind of stuff. And the reason has to do with the antibodies, for example. You know, like I said, antibodies can take almost 3 months to disappear. So if you're constantly having a little bit of food that you're not supposed to coming into the body, you're going to keep those antibodies recirculating. You never get a chance for them to go away. You never give your body the complete break that it needs to heal. So it's do it right the first time is the best thing to do. Do it right the first time, stick it out for the few months, notice the changes, get better, and then down the road, you can start to add those foods back in. And there's always ways to find an alternative to the foods that you love. If you absolutely love pizza or burgers or something, there are so many recipes out there where you can make grain-free, gluten-free buns with cassava flour, or just different alternatives to still consume the foods that you love. So again, it doesn't have to feel restrictive. Let's see. And then someone else made a comment about 3 to 6 months without certain foods. Yikes. Okay, yeah. So kind of what I just said, there are ways to still feel like you are satiated, full, you're getting the foods that you love just by looking for alternative options. And also, you know, when working with someone, this is also another benefit of working with someone like me or another type of functional practitioner or health coach, is that we are there to support you and guide you and teach you ways to make this not as hard, make it smooth. And another comment about it seeming like a considerable sacrifice. So yeah, and this is very important. Think about why you're doing this for yourself and how, if you don't approach your symptoms and try to reverse them and try to get healthier, what is your life going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And what are the negative effects of that? If I eat clean and start to notice less inflammation, can I still enjoy some wine on the weekends? Will that blow everything and bring the inflammation back? Yes. Unfortunately, again, back to the all or nothing approach, always recommend, even if I'm not working with an autoimmune client, we always take alcohol out for 3 months. And alcohol is a major stressor on the gut lining. It breaks it apart. It is a major stressor on the liver. So the liver is detoxifying all of your, helping break down your hormones, support natural hormone regulation, detoxifying any bad things that are coming into the body. So we want to stay away from wine for a little bit. Again, it is one of those just sacrifice for the short-term approaches. And then once you feel good and you're getting better after those few months, I'm not going to tell you you can't have wine ever again for the rest of your life. So we can always try to enjoy those things in moderation. And again, it is a case-by-case basis. So one glass of wine for someone might be great on the weekends, whereas it might really irritate somebody else. So just have to test it out and see. Okay, any other last questions? Oh. What are your thoughts on fasting? Does it do more harm than good? I heard it helps with weight loss. That's a really good question. And my approach is it depends on your hormones. So if you're, for example, if I test your hormones and your cortisol is very, very, very low, or your estrogen and progesterone and things like that are off, more so even for women because their hormone balance is very sensitive, I might say stay away from fasting while we're fixing the hormones. So that's another thing that is very specific, but fasting can be super beneficial for some people and other times not. There's so many different kinds of fasting. Intermittent fasting at, say, a 12-hour time frame overnight from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. would probably be the safest starting point for somebody if they want to try it. Whereas pushing it really far, doing a day fast, a couple day fast could put a lot of stress on the body. So it really depends where you're at with your personal disease state and everything else. Okay, so we are coming to, oh, what are the symptoms of metal toxicity? Also a good question. Metal toxicity, neurological issues, so brain fog. You could have some tingling and numbness in the extremities, extreme fatigue, muscle weakness, pain, swelling, lots of different things that metal toxicity can do to the body. Also depends like what metals it is too. How do I get it and how do I heal from it? Metals can come from eating a high amount of fish that have a lot of mercury in them. So tuna and a lot of the very large fish can come from cooking with aluminum pots and pans or like nonstick pans that have certain metals in them. Can come from copper drinking pipes or like lead pipes in your household. Sorry, lead pipes, not copper. Lots of environmental issues with metal toxicity and it coming from just things in the environment and home products and things like that. Healing from it, that you definitely need to work with a functional practitioner in order to talk about what would work best for you, what would be the safest approach. There are some dietary changes you can make in addition to a lot of supplements that help draw the metals out and bind to them to get them out of your body safely, as well as supporting things like lymphatic drainage and sweating and natural detoxification systems. Okay, so that is all of the questions on here for right now because I'm running out of time. But again, thank you all for joining me. And if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me on any of my social media platforms, which is going to be Natural Health Rising on everything, Instagram, Facebook, all of that. And again, I encourage you to go to naturalhealthrising.com to schedule a free consult with me. And we can chat about all this stuff and see if we would be a good fit for each other. So thanks again, and you guys enjoy the rest of your day. I'm going to send out this recording to you all so that you have it.